very heartened by your discussion of site visits to our prisons to get firsthand understanding of what's going on there. Sometimes members of Congress have had challenges doing that. Could you give us some advice if we wanted to glean those benefits and get that firsthand experience? What's the best way for us to go about that with your team?
Thank you, Congressman. So if you have your team reach out to our Office of Legislative Affairs, we will be happy to make that arrangement.
Thank you so much. Does the Bureau of Prisons retaliate against people based on on constitutionally protected speech?
I have been very clear that retaliation will not be stood for on my watch.
And you're confident that that's being observed throughout the Bureau?
I'm confident that message has been delivered, and if anyone engages in retaliation, we will hold them accountable.
Are you familiar with the matter of John Strand?
That name is not familiar to me, no.
So Mr. Strand was a witness at a hearing that we had regarding some of the civil rights concerns of people who had interacted with the Department of Justice in January 6 matters. He was convicted, sentenced at FCI Miami, and I'd received word that he had been placed into enhanced confinement and into higher acuity securing as a consequence of information that others had put out on his Twitter feed. So is that something does that ring a bell to you?
Congressman, I wouldn't be able to speak to an individual's circumstances regarding their behavior inside our institutions. What I can assure you is that if an individual is placed in our special housing unit, it would be for conduct that happened inside the institution.
So what's a special housing unit?
A special housing unit is one of our restrictive housing placements that could include disciplinary segregation, protective custody, and would house individuals that either were at harm to harm themselves or others, or had actually engaged in misbehavior inside our institutions.
What I'm worried about is that Mr. Strand gave us testimony about some of his concerns, and as you know, people give us testimony. We sort through what's right and wrong and should be acted on and shouldn't be acted on. It's not gospel, it's just testimony. But then thereafter, people were posting on some of his social media platforms his concerns about the treatment he'd received at the Bureau. And then I sent a letter to you concerned about that because, like you, I don't want anyone retaliated against for constitutionally protected speech. And thereafter, I got a letter back from the aforementioned Office of Legislative Affairs in your office, and they say, in part, Mr. Strand was moved to a secure housing unit with increased supervision and frequent employee contact on September 26, 2023, pending completion of an investigation. So I guess my question is, when someone, is that like akin to what we would normally think about as solitary confinement? Those words, secure housing unit with increased supervision and frequent employee contact?
We would use the word restrictive housing.
Okay. So what's this then? Because this guy's he was never violent toward anyone, so I'm just wondering why the assets that we fund for the highest acuity violent people would be used for this purpose.
Congressman, we use that special housing unit for individuals that engage in any sort of misconduct inside our institutions. I don't know what he was found to be guilty of by our hearings administrative process that would warrant his need to go into restrictive housing, but I assure you we have administrative processes that people have to go through before those placements actually occur.
Yeah, I get that you can't know the conditions of every single prisoner throughout the Bureau. This is one I've ripened and sent to you because I am worried that throughout our Department of Justice and what we've endured, that there are some people who are sort of being used as pawns, and they're being mistreated in order to send a message to other people. And I'm grateful that you've said here that is not your doctrine. You don't want to see that happen, but you also haven't been able to share with us an entire confidence that that isn't happening in some cases. And I'm worried that it's happening here. Have you heard of the matter of Owen Schrayer?
No, that name is not familiar to me.
Very similar fact pattern. You know, somebody who'd sort of spoken out, was prominent in the public, was convicted as a consequence of activities on January 6th, and now feels as though there's specific Bureau of Prison retaliation. I don't think any group of people should be retaliated against, so I look forward to taking you up on the offer to perhaps go and do some site visits and see how people are being treated and get that information directly. So I hope I get prompt cooperation from OLA. I thank the chair and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gaetz. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Peters, I introduced the Federal Prison Oversight Act, which I'm sure you're aware of, to increase the accountability and the transparency across our prison system. To ensure that the safety of our prisoners is a top priority, we need to have an efficient method of identifying the high-risk facilities that require more guidance and more attention. Director Peters, what system or metric system does the BOP offer to be able to identify these kinds of facilities?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think that we have a variety of oversight that helps us identify the high-risk facilities, including oversight from the Government Accountability Office, the Office of the Inspector General, and also our Program Review Division, who conducts audits of our institutions, including unannounced site visits and audits. And we rely on that data, including our regional offices that go in and perform independent reviews, interviewing the adults in custody, interviewing our employees, and creating an assessment of each one of our institutions so that we can address problems early on rather than waiting down the road.
Thank you. And in our meeting last week, we discussed the national recidivism rate, and I was pleased to learn that BOP has achieved a staffing level of reentry coordinators to 99%. And I commend you on that, with 100% expected very soon. What steps should we, as members of Congress, take to support those reentry programs and to reduce recidivism rates further than where they are now?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think resources are always the issue. I think our ability to contract with our residential reentry centers is really a golden nugget at the Federal Bureau of Prisons because they are in the communities that these individuals are coming back to. They know what resources are there, and they're able to provide those wraparound resources as it relates to programming, treatment, education, employment, so that they become productive, tax-paying citizens once they enter our community.
And last Congress, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, who's not with us today, convened 2 hearings on the oversight of BOP with a focus on the need to implement the First Step Act. She wanted to implement that fully and very, very thoughtfully. Since then, Director Peters has created policies that have actually corrected BOP's implementation of FSA, First Step Act. Yet inmates continue to complain about the lack of classes, and I understand that there's still no reliable calculator yet to determine the number of FSA credits that a prisoner can actually earn during their time in prison, and a shortage of halfway house placements. Director Peters, can you just kind of tell us how you intend on solving this problem?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So we're very proud of our First Step Act implementation. We have over 104,000 people participating in programs today in over 110 evidence-based programs and productive activities. And yet we can do better. As we now have pivoted out of the pandemic, being able to pull people into classrooms was difficult during that time period. And now as I visit our institutions and talk to our employees and our wardens, they're thrilled to talk about the ideas they have around expanding our programs and expanding space inside our institutions. That's been really difficult. So they're getting really creative about that as well. I think your expansion of Pell Grants and the access to those in our care and custody is going to be magnificent for this population and their ability to engage in that higher level education after receiving their GED. So I think we are on the right track. Again, you talked about overtime and augmentation, so recruitment and retention. Solving that problem is going to solve a lot of other underlying problems at the Bureau, including our ability to continue that programming so we're not pulling those people that leave those programming or those teachers from their posts as teachers onto the units to be correctional officers.
I have one last question for you. Would you object to an additional layer of oversight at BOP?
I always welcome oversight. I'm going to say that again and again. The only thing I would ask is that when you consider additional oversight in legislation, that we then receive the appropriate resources so that I'm not left flat-footed with additional requests and additional oversight or additional requests for information, and then we don't have the staff and resources to respond in a timely and efficient manner.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
yêu ai đến bây giờ mình đã biết. Chuyện tình đôi ta anh hãy xem là huyền thoại. Anh đừng giận em, kìa dĩ vãng mùa thương vẫn đẹp như giấc mơ. Trên trời bao ánh sao tình ta bấy nhiêu kỷ niệm. Nào ngờ hôm nay định mệnh chia rẽ đôi ta, em biết làm sao hơn. Mùi tóc làn môi và thư tình em xin gửi lại anh. Với tất cả cuộc vui em cũng xin trả lại anh. Dù mãi em theo chồng, đời đời em vẫn nhớ mãi mối tình đầu tiên. Thôi anh hãy đi về, khóc chỉ làm buồn thêm. Trời đã khuya từ lâu, càng vắng đêm tà tư. Mai này thuyền hoa vui đón em về cùng bên khác. Đường tình đôi ta hai hướng đi buồn thật buồn. Anh hiểu dùm em, nào ước muốn giàu sang bởi tình duyên trái ngang. Em vì chữ hiếu nên đành câm nín cho đệm lòng. Chuyện tình đôi ta nghẹn ngào trong đắng muôn cay, cõi vĩnh biệt thiên thu. Đời đời em vẫn nhớ mãi mối tình đầu tiên. Thôi anh hãy đi về, khóc chỉ làm buồn thêm. Trời đã khuya từ lâu, càng vắng đêm tà tư. Mai này thuyền hoa vui đón em về cùng bên khác. Đường tình đôi ta hai hướng đi buồn thật buồn. Anh hiểu dùm em, nào ước muốn giàu sang bởi tình duyên trái ngang. Em vì chữ hiếu nên đành câm nín cho đệm lòng. Chuyện tình đôi ta nghẹn ngào trong đắng muôn cay, thôi vĩnh biệt thiên